limits, man. Whoa. Okay, calm down.
You wrote a piece at FAIR about how there was this no-fly zone when it comes to the media's coverage of Nord Stream. So tell us what you were referring to when you wrote that piece, set that up, and then tell us what we now know.
Right. Well, I was talking about the intellectual no-fly zone that the U.S. media had placed over coverage of the Nord Stream pipeline and the attack and the events surrounding the attack. What I was looking at was the coverage that really implicated Russia as being behind the attack. You know, the pipelines were bombed in September, and immediately the U.S. media ecosystem spun to life and started pushing all these stories about how much, wow, this is clearly, obviously a Russian attack. They got all these U.S. experts to come and say, well, it was obviously Russia. Russia is the only one who had anything to gain. But this is, very peculiar, especially when you consider that the United States has been one of the leading critics of this pipeline for, the better part of a decade. The Obama administration opposed it. The Trump administration, when they were sanctioning Russia, they opposed the pipeline. And when the Biden administration came into office, Blinken said that one of his top priorities as Secretary of State was to ensure that the pipeline did not go forward, did not connect Russian gas to Germany. So the media seemed to ignore all of these obvious signals that the U.S. was behind the attack or might have been behind the attack. And all they did was publish the Russia did it narrative.
Right.
And there were a few exceptions in this media. Tucker Carlson, he's the worst. I mean, he's the worst. But he had a pretty good segment on it where he examined the evidence and he looked at the long U.S. history's opposition to this pipeline, and he gave a pretty good assessment. He said, well, could have been the U.S. Well, how did the mainstream media respond to this? Well, the Washington Post, they published an article that put Tucker Carlson's name in the Cyrillic alphabet.
Yeah, let's show this one. I'll show it right here.
Yeah, if you could find it, it's insane. They say like Russia's very happy about Tucker Carlson's conspiracy theory about the Nord Stream pipeline attack. And of course, if you read the article, they don't even go into the what Tucker was talking about.
Right.
They mentioned the statements from Biden. They mentioned the statements from Nuland. About how before the war they threatened that the pipeline would not go forward if Russia was to invade Ukraine. They didn't go into any of that. They just said, well, Russian state media is repeating this clip and putting it on there. Therefore, it must be false. It's Red Scare nonsense.
Yeah.
But this really set the tone for how the media was going to address this major crime. And we can talk about all the geopolitical realities that really point to U.S. complicity in this attack that was completely ignored by the Western press. And it's pretty shocking.
European leaders blame Russian sabotage after Nord Stream explosion.
Quoting European leaders without questioning them, of course.
Right.
They
and that was what? That was the Washington Post?
Yeah, I believe that was the Post,
yeah.
Yes.
Only Russia had the motivation, the Washington Post claimed, even as it reported that the pipeline steepened Europe's independence on Russian natural gas, which many, presumably Western officials now say was a grave strategic mistake. Then you have this, extending Russia, competing from advantageous ground.
Now, that's an interesting one. I mean, I'm sure some of your viewers and listeners are familiar with this RAND Corporation study. It's a study that was published in 2019. The RAND Corporation, major Pentagon think tank. It's really the one of the brains of American empire, really. And this report, this was famous. It came up, as the war started. It was famous for suggesting that the United States pour weapons into Ukraine while acknowledging that this could spark a Russian invasion. Well, I mean, this was part of a broader strategic goal of the United States, but this report also included pages about the importance of cutting off Russian natural gas exports to Europe. Now, there is a long history of the United States opposing European independence with respect to its relationship to Russia. I mean, go back to the foundation of NATO. The first NATO Secretary General, but I mean, he described the purpose of NATO as to keep the Americans in, the Russians out, and the Germans down. And that's really been the U.S. mantra for the Cold War period and the post-Cold War period. After Germany reunified, they started ramping up their economic power. And, it was pretty clear that if they kept going on the way they were, they might become an independent power center that could threaten U.S. hegemony over Europe, that might try into, look at a map. Europe's there and Russia is in Europe. It's only natural for them to come to some sort of rapprochement and deepen economic and political ties. Well, the U.S. doesn't want this. They understand that Europe is a junior partner in the entire project of American hegemonic empire, and they want to keep that. And so this Nord Stream pipeline was a major way for Europe, Germany specifically, to assert its independence. Remember, this is the Nord Stream 2. The first Nord Stream was completed in, I believe, the early 2010s. I don't have the specific date. But immediately after that, you had the Nord Stream 2 being proposed. And the U.S. was like, well, no, you can't do that. And the line was always, it would increase Russian leverage over Europe. That's always been the line, and they've opposed the pipeline on those grounds for years and years and years. And then we have the explosion.
Right.
But what you have here, you have this study. It was assessing the potential risks and benefits of various means of overextending and unbalancing Russia, which long-term U.S. goal. And one of the main ways that they said they could hurt Russia was to pour weapons into Ukraine. Russia understands that Ukraine is a strategic asset on its border. Go back to 2008. Our current CIA director, William Burns, said that, well, if we keep expanding NATO, Russia is going to have a reaction. And one of the last sentences in that report was that this is a decision that Russia does not want to have to make. But what did the U.S. do? The U.S. pushed it. The U.S. said, we can expand NATO however far we want. And part of this project of overextending Russia included cutting off Europe from Russian natural gas. Now, why is Russian natural gas so important to Germany? Well, it's very cheap, and the proximity means that they can get lots of it, lots of Russian natural gas, and it can fuel the German economy. They can have a manufacturing base that's able to compete with on a global scale. But as this war started and sanctions against Russia started, becoming the de facto language of European foreign policy, well, the German economy started to suffer. Energy prices started to rise. By August of 2022, I'm reading a Bloomberg report here. It said that in some cases, the European gas for the next month settled Thursday at a record high of 241 euros per megawatt hour, about 11 times higher than usual for this time of year. And then at the same time, you started seeing reports about how the German economy was at risk of deindustrialization. They're not using that word lightly. This is the business press. This is the Economist. This is Forbes. This is Business Insider. They're all talking about German deindustrialization as a result of this Russian gas being cut off. And so it's all part of the same project, and we should understand this as in its context in the world system.
So you had this intellectual no-fly zone, as you describe it. Then you had Seymour Hersh comes forward with the report, and he's smeared as a once reputable journalist. But what does he say? And then what is the latest that we've learned?
All right. So last month, Seymour Hersh publishes a piece on his Substack alleging that the U.S. was indeed behind the Nord Stream pipeline attack. And he goes into detail about the story about the U.S. collusion with the Norwegian government in this. and they have a role to play given this entire gas intrigue, this gas and energy intrigue. But he alleged that Joe Biden had ordered this attack and had ordered the planning for this attack before the Russians even invaded. In fact, this was in fall and winter of 2021. And remember, the Russians invaded in February of 2022. And so he also alleged that the Biden administration knew that this planning was underway and they understood that this was possible. And this is when you get these statements from Joe Biden and Victoria Nuland. I don't know if you have those clips readily available, but Joe Biden, he says, America can destroy the Nord Stream pipeline. Someone asked him, like, how are you going to stop the pipeline when this is a German project? He said, mark my words, we will be able to do it. And a little bit before that, you had Victoria Nuland, who, and I know Ben Norton on his show started playing the Beethoven dun 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 whenever you hear Victoria Nuland, because she's such the swamp monster of all swamp monsters. Her husband is Robert Kagan, one of the founders of the Project for a New American Century, which went into the Bush administration. She's the ghouls of the ghouls. Right. But even she said, well, if Russia invades, the Nord Stream pipeline will not go forward.
Yeah, I actually have the video. Sorry, I cut you off. Do you want to see the video? Good. Matt Orff did a good compilation. Look, we can just watch a couple minutes of it.
There will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that?
I promise you we'll be able to do it.
Someone blew up Russia's Nord Stream pipeline. I mean, we'd have to conclude without the evidence that it's most likely
Russian sabotage on its own infrastructure.
But the common sense matter.
I think it's Putin's way of sending a message.
What Putin is saying to us by blowing up his pipeline is, look, I can blow up a pipeline.
Everyone knows that Putin did this himself.
It's the closest thing to a smoking gun without the direct proof.
Yeah, I think logic and common sense will tell you that
without the evidence,
Russia was behind the incident.
We can say it for sure.
Who sabotaged the Nord Stream 2 pipeline?
The Russians.
The fact that people didn't even have to come up for a reason why they would do the self-sabotage.
What's worse is that the New York Times was even writing about how, the motive for why Russia would do this is really unclear. And, so did like NPR and Washington.
Right.
They all acknowledged that the motive wasn't very clear for Russia to bomb its own pipeline. It spent billions of dollars to complete.